Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a close look at a topic that touches nearly every single modern business, yet somehow consistently trips up accounting students and professionals alike. We're talking about how to account for website costs. Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to unpack SIC 32, which is the authoritative guidance that demystifies a really common problem. Is the money you spend on a website an asset that actually adds value to your balance sheet, or is it just an expense that immediately hits the profit and loss statement?
Here's our roadmap for the explainer. We'll cover the background of SIC 32, map out the connected accounting standards, break down the actual timeline of building a website, reveal the final accounting consensus, and wrap up with a practical summary.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Background and Context, setting the stage for SIC 32.
Think about it. Every modern business has a digital footprint. But from an accounting perspective, websites present a fascinating and honestly sometimes headache-inducing challenge. Imagine a local bakery building a brand new state-of-the-art website. They spend thousands on developers, graphic designers, and content creators. The real question we have to answer is that money an asset, like their oven or their delivery van, sitting proudly on the balance sheet? Or is it an everyday sunk expense, kind of like their monthly electricity bill?
Well, that exact dilemma is why SIC 32 was created. Now, SIC 32 isn't a standalone standard. Actually, it's a specific interpretation that sits underneath IAS 38, which you'll remember is the main standard for intangible assets. SIC 32 acts as the definitive rulebook detailing exactly when the internal costs of developing a website qualify as an intangible asset, and when they absolutely must be expensed.
Moving right along to Section 2, Standards referenced in SIC 32. This is all about the accounting ecosystem. It is super vital to understand that SIC 32 does not exist in a vacuum. It heavily interacts with other standards to form a complete picture. Let's look at the linkages. For instance, if you build a website specifically to sell to someone else, well, that triggers IFRS 15 for revenue, or IAS 2 for inventory. Leasing website software? That falls under IFRS 16. And of course, IAS 38 is the parent standard governing the core rules of intangibles, while IAS 36 steps in for impairment. It's a highly interconnected web.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the strict exceptions to these rules. SIC 32 excludes physical hardware. Your web servers, staging servers, and internet connections, those are governed by IAS 16 for property, plant, and equipment. Additionally, the fees you pay to an internet service provider to host your website bypass this entirely. Those are just everyday expenses under IAS 1.
It really helps to visualize the physical versus the digital here. The intangible software code, the digital graphics, and the architecture of the website, those fall right under SIC 32. But the physical metal server rack humming away in a data center that actually holds that code, that is tangible hardware, completely separate and governed by IAS 16. Mixing these two up is a very common trap.
Section 3, the core accounting issue, or the 5 stages of website development.
To solve the whole asset versus expense dilemma, SIC 32 breaks the chaotic process of building a website into a really neat chronological timeline. If our fictional bakery builds a site that go through distinct stages. First up is planning, just figuring out what they want. Second, application and infrastructure, writing the code and setting up databases. Third is graphical design and content, taking mouth-watering photos of the pastries and designing the layout. And finally, the operating phase, simply maintaining the live site. But before we even talk about capitalization, SIC 32 draws a hard line with some clear exclusions. Costs incurred in Stage 1, the planning phase, and Stage 4, the operating phase, must absolutely always be expensed immediately. Why? Because during planning, it isn't certain a viable asset will actually result from it. And operating costs? That's just routine maintenance, which doesn't create any new value.
And the accounting logic for this comes directly from our connected standards. Under the parent standard, IAS 38, the planning stage is essentially treated as the research phase, which never qualifies as an asset. Meanwhile, the operating stage aligns perfectly with the conceptual framework's definition of everyday expense recognition, purely because you're simply consuming services to keep the site running.
Let's look at Section 4, Consensus and Accounting Treatment, the final verdict.
Okay, so we've eliminated the planning and operating phases, so what happens to the heavy lifting? The actual coding, infrastructure, and design stages. So the crucial point is this.
For those middle development stages to be capitalized as an asset, they must pass the strict tests outlined in IAS 38.57. Management has to demonstrate the technical feasibility of completing the site, their intention and ability to finish it, and most importantly, they must prove how the website will generate probable future economic benefits.
Now this is where the magic happens. How do you actually prove a website generates economic benefit? Well, if our fictional bakery builds an e-commerce site where customers can directly place online orders and pay for cakes, boom, that directly generates revenue. It passes the test and the development costs are capitalized. But what if the website just lists their address, phone number, and a few pictures?
That triggers a massive exception. If a website is built solely or primarily for promoting and advertising the entity's own products and services, acting essentially like a digital billboard, SIC 32 dictates that you cannot demonstrate it will generate probable future economic benefits. Consequently, all expenditure on developing a purely promotional website must be recognized as an expense right when incurred. No exceptions.
For the sites that do pass the test and get capitalized, we have to look post-launch. Under IAS 38, the website asset must be amortized. And because technology changes incredibly fast, SIC 32 notes the useful life should be short. Furthermore, under IAS 36, that website asset must be regularly tested for impairment to ensure its carrying value hasn't dropped. And, as always, IAS 1 handles the ongoing hosting fees as an expense. Finally, Section 5, Summary and Practical Application. Think of this as your ultimate study guide.
And this brilliantly illustrates how all these rules pulled together. Planning is an expense. Operating is an expense. The application, infrastructure, design, and content stages can be capitalized, but only if you meet the rigorous conditions of IAS 38, specifically proving the site generates direct economic benefits, like an e-commerce platform. If you want to ace your exams or perfect your accounting practice, you've got to memorize these key exclusions. Hardware is out. Hosting fees are out. Purely promotional brochure websites are out. Preliminary planning and routine post-launch maintenance are out. All of these items bypass the intangible asset balance sheet entirely and head straight to the income statement as expenses. You also really need to remember the connected accounting ecosystem we mapped out. SIC 32 relies heavily on IAS 16 to handle the physical hardware, IAS 38 for the foundational rules of intangibles and rapid amortization, IAS 36 to ensure the website asset isn't impaired, and IFRS 15 if the business model is actually building websites to sell to third parties. In practice, and especially on exams, these are the common pitfalls you'll see. People wrongly try to capitalize their monthly hosting fees, or they try to capitalize a basic informational blog that has zero direct revenue stream. Sometimes they capitalize a complex e-commerce site but forget to amortize it rapidly, leaving a stale asset on the books. Or they lump the cost of a physical server and the software code into one single asset. Watch out for those.
Let's leave off with this thought. The internet moves at a blistering pace. What qualifies as an income-generating e-commerce asset today might literally be a dinosaur in just 2 years. As technology, AI, and digital platforms evolve, how will traditional accounting standards keep up with measuring the true useful life of these digital assets? It's a fascinating question and definitely one you should keep exploring. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.